The neon lights of the gas station were the only witnesses when my stepmother slapped me across the face. She thought she was untouchable, but then my brother, 21 years old and trembling, pulled her back. He leaned in and whispered that the safety reports were fake, and our father knew everything. As their SUV sped away into the rain, I looked up at the security camera and realized they had just handed me the evidence to destroy them. My name is Lila Lane, and at 32 years old, I had seen enough corporate boardrooms to know that the most dangerous predators wore silk, not claws. It was a Tuesday night, raining so hard the drops felt like gravel hitting the windshield of my sedan. I was driving through the outskirts of Riverton, Ohio, a stretch of highway that felt abandoned by God and the Department of Transportation alike. My back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, the souvenir of a week spent sitting in stiff chairs during industrial safety hearings 3 counties over. All I wanted was a cup of coffee that did not taste like battery acid and a bathroom that locked. I pulled into the first station I saw. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow onto the wet pavement. It was a Brightway stop, one of those ubiquitous convenience stores that had popped up all over the Midwest in the last decade. The place was empty, save for a sleepy clerk staring at his phone behind the bulletproof glass. I parked away from the pumps, near the air compressor that looked like it had not worked since the 90s. I just needed 5 minutes of peace. I stepped out of the car, pulling my trench coat tighter against the wind. The smell of gasoline and wet asphalt filled my lungs. It was a familiar scent, one that usually grounded me, but tonight it just made me feel nauseous. I was halfway to the sliding glass doors when high-intensity LED headlights swept across the lot, blinding me. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a visceral reaction, the kind of fight-or-flight instinct you develop when you grow up in a house where the mood can shift from sunny to thunderstorms in the blink of an eye. I shielded my eyes, squinting through the rain. A black luxury SUV pulled up right next to my modest sedan, taking up 2 spaces. I knew that car. I knew the vanity plate before I even read it. Victoria. My stepmother stepped out of the driver's seat before the engine had even fully died. She was dressed immaculately, as if she were heading to a gala rather than stopping for gas at 11 at night. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete, a metronome of impending disaster. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my first car, and not a single hair on her head moved in the wind. She looked perfect. She looked terrifying. I froze. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be at the ribbon-cutting ceremony in Columbus. "Nyla," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the sound of the rain and the highway traffic like a razor blade. I did not have time to formulate a lie or an excuse. I simply stood there, paralyzed by the sudden collision of my 2 worlds. Before I could speak, she closed the distance between us. She did not smile. She did not offer a greeting. Instead, her hand shot out, manicured fingers digging into the fabric of my coat sleeve. "We need to talk," she hissed. She did not wait for my consent. She yanked me, physically dragging me away from the front entrance, away from the bored clerk, and around the corner of the building to the dark side where the dumpster and the air conditioning units hummed. This was the blind spot. She knew exactly where it was. Of course she did. She owned the place. "Let go of me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to summon the authority I wielded in my professional life. But in her grip, I felt like I was 12 years old again, being scolded for leaving a book on the dining table. Victoria shoved me backward. I stumbled, my shoulder blade colliding with the rough brick wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, not enough to injure, but enough to shock. "You think I do not know what you are doing?" she demanded, her face inches from mine. I could smell her expensive perfume, a cloying floral scent that masked the smell of ozone and rain. I straightened my jacket, trying to regain some dignity. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Victoria, do not lie to me." "Nyla." Her voice cracked, losing its polished veneer. "I hear whispers. I see the inquiries. You are digging around. You are trying to destroy this family, after everything your father has done for you. You are ungrateful, spiteful trash." I am doing my job, I said, my voice low. Your job is to stay out of my business, she spat. You are jealous. You have always been jealous because you could never build anything. You only know how to tear things down. You are pathetic. The words were practiced shrapnel, designed to hit the old wounds. I opened my mouth to retort, to tell her that I was not the scared little girl she remembered, but she did not let me speak. She raised her hand and struck me. It was a sharp, stinging slap across my left cheek. It was not a blow meant to knock me out. It was a blow meant to correct a subordinate. It was an act of dominance. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, hot and humiliating against the cold rain. I stood there, stunned. I was 32 years old. I was a state official. And I had just been slapped by my stepmother behind a gas station dumpster. Mom, stop. The voice came from the SUV. I looked up to see Eli running toward us. My little brother, except he was not little anymore. He was 21 years old, tall and lanky, with the same soft eyes he had as a child, now clouded with a perpetual anxiety. He was wearing a Brightway uniform jacket over his hoodie. He threw himself between us, his hands raised in a placating gesture. He did not face her. He faced me, using his body to shield her from a retaliation that was not coming, or perhaps to shield me from her. Get back in the car. Eli, Victoria snapped, not looking at him, her eyes still bored into mine. Mom, please, Eli begged, his voice cracking. People will see. Let them see, she hissed, though she took a half step back, smoothing the front of her coat, regaining her mask of sanity. Let them see what a disappointment looks like. Eli turned to me. His hands were shaking. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip firm but desperate. I looked into his eyes and saw fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He looked like he was drowning. You need to go. Nyla, he said loudly. For her benefit, just go. We do not want you here. But as he spoke, his fingers dug into my coat, pulling me closer for a fraction of a second. The performance was for her, but the proximity was for me. He leaned in, his head tilting as if he were checking my cheek for a bruise, but his mouth hovered right next to my ear. The rain hammered down, drowning out the world, creating a cone of silence for just the two of us. Do not trust the safety reports, he whispered, the words rushing out on a terrified breath. I stiffened. I have seen the real numbers, he continued, his voice barely audible. But Dad knows everything. He pulled back before I could process the grenade he had just dropped into my lap. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, a silent message to stay silent, to play along. Get in the car. Eli, Victoria commanded, her voice icy. We are leaving. She does not deserve our time. Eli stepped away from me, his posture slumping into that familiar shape of defeat he had perfected over 2 decades. I am coming, he muttered. Victoria gave me one last look, a look of pure disdain, as if I were a stain on the concrete she regretted stepping in. She turned on her heel and marched back to the driver's side of the SUV. Eli followed, casting one last glance over his shoulder at me. He looked like a ghost haunting the living. They climbed into the vehicle. The engine roared to life, a beast waking up. I stood frozen in the rain, water dripping off my nose, my cheeks still throbbing with a dull heat. I watched the taillights of the Range Rover flare red as they peeled out of the lot, merging aggressively onto the dark highway. I was alone. The silence returned, heavier than before. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder. My hand went to my pocket, gripping my car keys until the metal bit into my palm. Do not trust the safety reports. Dad knows everything. The words replayed in my mind on a loop. My father, Richard Lane, the man who I thought was just weak, just tired, just overpowered by a younger, Nyla wife. Eli's whisper had just stripped away that defense. If he knew, he was not a victim, he was an accomplice. I took a deep breath, tasting the ozone and the exhaust fumes. The humiliation of the slap began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger in my stomach. It was a useful anger. It was the kind of anger that fueled late nights and thorough audits. "You want a war, Victoria?" I whispered to the empty lot. "You want to treat me like a child you can discipline in the dark?" I turned back toward the gas station. I looked up at the overhang, past the flickering neon sign. There, nestled in the corner of the roof, was a small, dome-shaped security camera. It was not the dummy camera they put over the door to scare shoplifters. It was a wide-angle lens, positioned to cover the side lot and the air pumps. It was pointed exactly where we had been standing. A dark, humorless smile touched my lips. Victoria was so arrogant. She thought because she owned the chain, she owned the truth. She thought because she was the queen of Brightway, the laws of physics and surveillance did not apply to her. She did not know who I was anymore. She saw the stepdaughter who ran away. She did not know she had just assaulted a senior investigator for the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission. I looked at the camera lens, the rain blurring my vision, but not my resolve. I realized then that I was not just a random customer at a random stop. This was station number 402 on my list. This was a Brightway stop. And I was going to burn it to the ground, not with fire, but with paperwork. "Okay," I said, my voice steady now. "If this is how she wants to play, I am done covering for anyone." I walked back to my car, the pain in my cheek forgotten, my mind already drafting the subpoena. The rain kept falling, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I only felt the heat of the fire that had just been lit. To understand why I stood under that rain-slicked overhang watching my family drive away, you have to understand who I was before I became a woman who haunts gas stations at midnight. 5 years ago, I was not inspecting fuel pumps or auditing underground storage tanks. I was a junior associate at a high-billing commercial litigation firm in downtown Columbus. I wore tailored suits that cost half a paycheck and spent my days arguing that negligence was actually just unfortunate coincidence. I was good at it. I could look at a stack of safety violations and find the one grammatical error that invalidated the whole claim. Then came the warehouse collapse in Dayton. My firm represented the construction company. I remember sitting in the deposition room across from a widow who was my age. Her husband had been crushed because my client wanted to save 15% on steel support beams. I had to look her in the eye and argue that her husband should have known the risks of standing in Zone 4. I won the motion. We settled for pennies on the dollar. I went home that night, threw up in my bathroom sink, and resigned the next morning. That was the day Nyla Lane, the shark attorney, died. In her place rose someone much quieter, much poorer, and infinitely more dangerous. I took my law degree and my knowledge of corporate loopholes and walked into the public sector. I wanted to be the one catching the structural failures before the roof came down, not the one explaining them away afterwards. My family, however, never understood the shift. To them, I had simply failed. My father, Richard Lane, was a man who had spent his life hauling freight across the Midwest. He was salt of the earth, calloused hands and a back that hurt when it rained. He built a small trucking logistics company from nothing, but the recession and rising fuel costs had hollowed him out. By the time I was out of law school, he was drowning in debt and looking for a lifeline. He found one in Victoria. Victoria was not just a stepmother. She was a rebranding campaign in human form. She swept into my father's life when I was 25 and Eli was 14. She was sharp, attractive in a terrifyingly symmetrical way, and possessed an ambition that made the air in the room feel thin. She did not just marry my father, she acquired him. She took his failing logistics assets, sold off the trucks, and pivoted hard into retail and fuel. That was the birth of Brightway stops. I remember the Sunday dinners during those early transition years. They were theater, staged for an audience of none. We would sit at the mahogany table Victoria had bought on credit, eating food that was too fancy for a Tuesday night, listening to her rewrite history. "I saved this family," she would say, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "If it were not for my vision, Richard, you would be driving a rig for someone else right now." My father would just nod, staring at his plate. He looked smaller next to her. The loud, boisterous man who used to teach me how to change a tire was gone, replaced by this quiet, gray shadow who signed whatever paper she slid across the tablecloth. The dynamic in the house was subtle but suffocating. Victoria never hit me. She never screamed. She simply eroded me. If I offered a legal opinion on a contract, she would laugh, a light, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Nyla," she would say, patting my hand. "You are so theoretical. Real business is not like your law books. You are too sensitive for the rough and tumble of the real world. That is why you quit the firm, isn't it? You just do not have the stomach for success." She painted me as the fragile, broken daughter, the one who could not hack it in the big leagues. And because my father was too tired to fight her, he started to believe it too. Eli was caught in the crossfire. My baby brother, 11 years my junior, was the only thing we all had in common. But where I fought back with silence and distance, Eli learned to survive by becoming a chameleon. He became whatever Victoria needed him to be. If she needed a prop for her perfect family photo, he smiled. If she needed someone to agree that I was being dramatic, he nodded. But I saw the toll it took. I saw the way he picked at his cuticles until they bled. The first time I truly suspected that Brightway was not just a business, but a ticking time bomb was 3 years ago. I was visiting for Thanksgiving. The air in the house was tense. Victoria was pacing the living room, barking orders into her phone. Apparently, there had been a fire at the North Riverton location. I sat up, my safety inspector instincts flaring. A fire at a gas station is never a small matter. It involves suppression systems, emergency shutoffs, EPA notifications. "Is everyone okay?" I asked when she finally hung up. "Did the suppression system trigger?" Victoria waved a hand dismissively, sipping her third glass of Chardonnay. "It was nothing. A trash can caught fire near the pumps. Probably a cigarette. It is handled." "Did you file the incident report with the fire marshal?" I pressed. "If it was near the pumps, you are legally required to—" "Stop it, Nyla!" she snapped. "God, you are always looking for a catastrophe. We handled it internally. We do not need the fire department siren blasting and scaring away customers for a burning napkin. It is bad for the brand image." I looked at my father. "Dad, you know that is a violation. If the vapors had ignited—" Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. "Listen to Victoria, honey. She knows what she's doing. Do not make trouble where there is none." That was the mantra. Do not make trouble. Later that night, I found Eli in the kitchen. He was 18 then, just starting to work shifts at the stations to earn money for college. He looked pale, staring into the open refrigerator. "Eli," I said softly, "you were at the North Station today, weren't you?" He stiffened but did not turn around. "Was it just a trash can?" I asked. He hesitated. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were old, too old for a teenager. "It was the pump." "Nyla," he whispered. The nozzle sparked. The auto shutoff did not work. We had to use the manual extinguishers. My blood ran cold. That was a mechanical failure of a critical safety system. If that was happening at one station, it could be happening at others. "You have to report that. Eli," I said, "if Mom won't, you have to tell Dad." Eli laughed, a dry, humorless sound that sounded terrifyingly like our father. "Dad signed off on the maintenance deferral last month. Nyla, Mom told him the new pumps were too expensive this quarter. He knows. He knows." That was the moment the ground fell out from under me. I had always thought my father was a victim of Victoria's ambition. I thought he was just being dragged along. But negligence requires a signature. If he was signing off on deferring safety maintenance to save money, he was not a hostage. He was a gambler, betting human lives against quarterly profits. "You need to get out of there. Eli," I told him, "quit. I will help you with tuition." He shook his head, closing the refrigerator door. "It is not that simple. The money. Everything is tied up. If I leave, she cuts me off, and she will take it out on Dad. You do not understand. Nyla, it is not like it is on paper." I left the next morning. I moved out of my nice apartment and into a one-bedroom walk-up in the city, cutting my expenses to the bone. I stopped coming to Sunday dinners. I stopped offering legal advice. I became exactly what Victoria said I was, the estranged, difficult daughter. But she made a critical error. She assumed that because I was silent, I was inactive. She assumed that my new job in the public sector was just pushing paper in a basement. 2 months after that Thanksgiving, I received an email on my secure server. It was from the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission, also known as the SCSC. The subject line was simple: offer of employment, senior investigator. The job description was grueling. It involved long hours, travel to remote industrial sites, and the hatred of every business owner in the state. The pay was a fraction of what I made as a lawyer. I accepted it within 30 seconds. For 2 years, I worked my way up. I learned the codes. I learned how to read a structural blueprint better than an architect. I learned that bad actors always leave a paper trail, usually hidden in the budget lines for maintenance and training. I never told my family what I really did. To them, I was just a consultant for the state, a boring bureaucrat. Victoria never asked for details because she did not care. My father never asked because he was too ashamed. So when I pulled into that Brightway station tonight, bruised and tired, I was not just a daughter looking for a bathroom. I was a hunter who had finally stumbled onto the trail of the wolf that had eaten her family. The slap at the gas station was personal, but the whisper from Eli, warning me about the reports, confirming that the rot went all the way to the top, that was professional. I sat in my car in the rain, watching the empty spot where Victoria's SUV had been. I pulled out my phone and opened my work email. There was a folder I had created 6 months ago, titled simply Pending Inquiries. It was empty. I had never dared to type the name Brightway into the system, afraid of the conflict of interest, afraid of what I might find. But Eli said the reports were fake. He said Dad knew. I tapped the screen, composing a new message to my director. Mason Reeves. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of crossing a line I could never uncross. Subject: conflict of interest, disclosure, request for special assignment. I typed the first sentence. I am formally disclosing a familial relationship with the ownership of Brightway Stops. I paused. This was it. The moment I hit send, I was declaring war. Not a screaming match in the kitchen, but a calculated, legal dismantling of my father's legacy. I thought of the widow from the warehouse collapse. I thought of the spark at the nozzle Eli had described. I thought of Victoria's hand striking my face, her absolute certainty that she was above consequences. I finished the email. However, I have reason to believe there are systemic, unreported safety violations within the chain that pose an immediate threat to public safety. I am requesting authorization to consult on the data analysis for this entity, strictly in an advisory capacity. I hit send. The screen went dark. The rain drummed on the roof. I started the engine. The heater kicked on, blowing warm air onto my cold hands. I was done being the victim. I was done being the disappointment. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the station, leaving the neon lights behind. Victoria wanted a perfect business. I was going to give her a perfect audit. To understand the weight of the silence in my car that night at the gas station, you have to go back 4 months. You have to understand that while my family thought I was sitting in a cramped apartment doing freelance paralegal work for slip-and-fall attorneys, I was actually sitting in a corner office on the 14th floor of the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission building. My official title was Senior Lead Investigator. My clearance level allowed me to access the maintenance logs of every registered industrial entity in the state. I did not wear a uniform. I wore sharp blazers and operated in the quiet, sterile world of digital forensics and compliance law. I was the person they called when a factory exploded and the owners claimed it was an act of God, and my job was to prove it was actually an act of deferred maintenance. It was a Tuesday morning in November when the system flagged a new case file. I was sipping black coffee, scrolling through a backlog of elevator inspection certifications, when a priority notification blinked onto my dual monitors. Case file number 799 Alpha. Subject: repeated thermal events and structural integrity concerns. Entity: Brightway Stops, Incorporated. My heart did not just skip a beat, it stopped entirely. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking next to the name of the company my stepmother built on the ruins of my father's dignity, Brightway Stops. For a moment, I was not an investigator. I was the daughter who had been told she was too emotional for business. I was the girl who had been edged out of her own inheritance. But the training kicked in. I took a slow breath, pushed the personal history into a locked box in the back of my mind, and opened the file. The preliminary data was a bloodbath disguised as a spreadsheet. In the last 24 months, there had been 3 separate fires at Brightway locations across the state. 3 in the world of fuel retail. 1 fire is a catastrophe, 3 is a pattern. The report noted that the first incident had resulted in second-degree burns to a customer's legs when a pump handle malfunctioned and sprayed gasoline over a hot engine block. I scrolled down to the conclusions filed by the local inspectors. Incident 1, equipment failure, isolated event. Incident 2, user error, customer smoking in a prohibited zone. Incident 3, electrical short in the signage, no structural damage. They were clean, too clean. They were the kind of conclusions that get written when someone buys the inspector a very nice steak dinner or threatens to call the mayor. But I had access to the raw data, the stuff that gets uploaded automatically by the central servers before humans can scrub it. I pulled up the maintenance logs for the pump that had sprayed the customer. The log showed a flow rate error, warning flashing for 16 days before the accident. 16 days. And next to each daily warning was a manual override code. I checked the repair notes. There was an entry from a contracted mechanic dated 2 weeks prior to the fire. It read, "Valve seals degrading, replacement required immediately, part on back order." Then, a second note, added 3 hours later. Management directive, apply sealant patch, delay replacement until Q4 budget cycle. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. A sealant patch on a high-pressure fuel line. To save a few $100s, they had turned a gas pump into a flamethrower. I knew I had to report this, but I also knew the protocol. I stood up, straightened my blazer, and walked down the hall to the office of the director. Mason Reeves. Mason was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, a former federal regulator who had seen every trick in the book. He respected me because I was the only one in the department who could read a legal contract as well as a blueprint. I knocked and entered. "Mason," I said, keeping my voice flat, "I have a conflict of interest declaration regarding the new priority file, 799 Alpha, Brightway Stops." Mason looked up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow. He waited. "The CEO, Victoria Lane, is my stepmother." I said, "The CFO, Richard Lane, is my father." Mason sat back in his chair, the leather creaking. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me for a long moment. "Well, Nyla, that is a significant conflict. I am recusing myself from the active field investigation," I stated, reciting the handbook policy. "I cannot be the face of the inquiry. It would compromise the integrity of the findings if they claim bias later." "Correct," Mason said. "I will assign it to Alvarez." "However," I continued, stepping further into the room, "I am requesting authorization to remain on the file as a technical consultant. I know their internal structure. I know how they file their paperwork. And looking at the preliminary data, Mason, they are burying things. If you send Alvarez in cold, they will bury him in paperwork until the statute of limitations runs out. You need someone who knows where the bodies are buried." Mason tapped his pen on the desk. He was calculating the risk. He knew I was the best forensic analyst he had. He also knew that if this went south, it would look like a family vendetta. "You stay off the official paperwork," Mason said finally. "Your name appears on no subpoenas, no interview transcripts. You are a ghost. Nyla, you analyze the data. You guide Alvarez. But you do not exist in the public record. If this blows up, I cannot protect you." "Understood," I said. I went back to my desk and went dark. I logged into the system using a mirror account, a standard procedure for sensitive investigations, and began to dig. I did not just look at the maintenance logs this time. I went for the communication archives. Brightway used a third-party server for their internal emails, one that happened to be subject to state oversight because they held a government contract for fueling county vehicles. It was a loophole they had likely forgotten about, but it gave me a backdoor into their inbox. I filtered the search by sender. V. Lane Exec. Reading Victoria's emails was like listening to her voice echo in my head. They were short, sharp, and brutal. Email dated October 12th. To Regional Maintenance Lead. Subject, Pump 4 replacement. Content, the cost estimate for the replacement is unacceptable. We are in the middle of an expansion phase. Find a workaround. If the sensor is faulty, disable the sensor. Do not use the word dangerous in written correspondence again. It is bad for liability. Fix it cheaply, or I will find a manager who can. My stomach churned. Disable the sensor. She put it in writing. She was so arrogant, so sure of her power, that she typed out an instruction to bypass safety protocols and hit send. I kept digging. I needed to see who was executing these orders. I needed to see who was signing off on the workarounds. I pulled up a report from the station in Riverton, the one I would eventually find myself standing at in the rain. This report was regarding the underground tank sensors. They were detecting water intrusion, a sign that the tank walls were failing. If fuel leaked into the groundwater, it would be an environmental disaster. The initial report from the automated system showed a red flag, integrity failure, level 4. But the final PDF that was saved to the compliance folder, the one meant for state inspectors, was green. It read, Integrity verified. Sensor calibration error corrected. I right-clicked on the file and opened the metadata properties. I wanted to see who had modified the document. I expected to see the name of a corrupt site manager, or maybe Victoria herself. The text in the last modified by field made the room spin. User, E. Lane. Timestamp, 2:30 in the morning. Eli. I stared at the name, willing it to change. E. Lane, my little brother, the boy who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms because he was scared of the noise. The boy I had tried to protect from Victoria's venom. He was 21 now. He was a shift supervisor, but he was not just managing schedules and ordering snacks. He was logging into the compliance server in the middle of the night and altering safety data. I sat back in my chair, the ergonomic mesh digging into my spine. This changed everything. If I pursued this, if I handed this evidence to Mason, I was not just taking down Victoria. I was handing my brother a felony charge. Falsifying safety records that result in injury could carry a prison sentence. Was he doing it willingly? Was he the golden child following in his mother's footsteps, learning how to cut corners for profit? Or was he the terrified kid I remembered, doing exactly what he was told because he didn't know how to say no? I remembered his face the last time I saw him, the way he flinched when Victoria raised her voice. I remembered the text he sent me on my birthday, a simple, "Miss you," sent when he knew she wouldn't be looking at his phone. He was editing the metadata. He was the hand that turned the red flags green. I closed my eyes, picturing the burns on the customer's legs from the first fire. I pictured the groundwater in Riverton slowly turning toxic. Then I opened my eyes and looked at the screen again. The timestamp was 2:30 in the morning, a time for secrets. If Eli is doing this, I whispered to the empty office, then he is either a criminal or a hostage. I grabbed a notepad and wrote down the file number and the metadata hash. I was not going to stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, the next fire might not just burn a leg. It might burn down a neighborhood. And if Eli was involved, the only way to save him was to drag the whole rotten structure into the light, even if it meant I had to be the one to put the handcuffs on him. I saved the evidence to an encrypted drive. The die was cast. I was going to investigate my own family, and I was going to find out exactly why my brother was awake at 2 in the morning erasing the truth. This was the baggage I carried with me weeks later when I pulled into that gas station. This was why I froze when Victoria appeared, and this was why, when Eli whispered to me in the rain, I knew he wasn't just warning me, he was confessing. The television in my small living room bathed the walls in a cool blue light. I sat on my worn sofa, a notepad balanced on my knee, watching the local news channel broadcast what felt like a personal insult. Victoria Lane sat in a plush studio chair, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, Victoria Lane, Entrepreneur of the Year and Community Safety Icon. At Brightway, she said, her voice smooth like expensive chocolate, we do not just sell fuel, we sell trust. When a mother pulls into our station at night to buy milk for her children, she needs to know she is safe. She needs to know that our environment is pristine. That is my promise. Safety is not just a policy for us, it is our DNA. I let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded too loud in the empty apartment. I looked down at my notepad. On it, I had written the words, valve seals, groundwater contamination, metadata manipulation. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was looking into the camera, lying to thousands of people, and she did it with the conviction of a saint. I remembered being 16, sitting at the kitchen table, watching her dismiss a contractor who warned her that the roof of the main warehouse needed bracing. She had told him that fear was bad for business and fired him on the spot. The interviewer nodded enthusiastically. That is so inspiring. Mrs. Lane, and we hear you are receiving the prestigious Golden Shield Award at the State Trade Conference this Friday? Victoria touched her chest, feigning humility. We are humbled. Truly, it validates all the hard work my family has put in. I clicked the TV off. The room went dark. My family. She always used that word like a shield when she needed defense, and like a sword when she needed to cut someone out. The next morning, the headache started before I even reached my desk. The State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission was buzzing with activity. The annual State Trade Conference was the biggest event of the year, a mix of politics, business, and regulatory posturing. Mason Reeves called me into his office the moment I swiped my badge. Sit down. Nyla, he said. I sat. The file for Brightway stops was open on his desk. You saw the news? He asked. I nodded. It was hard to miss. They are getting the Golden Shield, Mason said, tapping the file. The Chamber of Commerce voted on it 3 months ago. Before we opened this investigation, it is a legacy award. It is a joke, I said. You have the data. Mason, you know about the fires. You know about the overrides. You cannot let them walk up on that stage and accept a safety award while their tanks are leaking into the water table. Mason leaned forward, his expression unreadable. I cannot stop a private organization from giving out a plaque. Nyla, our investigation is still covert. If we move now, before we have the hard evidence of criminal intent, their lawyers will bury us in injunctions. We need the smoking gun. We need to prove they are doing it on purpose, not just through negligence. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a speaker's itinerary. However, Mason said, a tight smile playing on his lips, we can make them sweat. The commission has a slot for a keynote speech on safety culture in small businesses. I want you to take it. I stared at him. You want me to speak? At the same conference? Mason nodded. You are the lead consultant on the data. You know the patterns. I want you to go up there and give a presentation on how companies manipulate safety data. Do not use their name. Do not cite their specific numbers. But talk about the methodology. Talk about the fake logs. Talk about the danger. He sat back. Let them sit in the audience and listen to you describe exactly what they are doing. Watch their faces. Nyla. See who squirms. It was a dangerous game, but as I thought about Victoria's smug face on the television, a cold determination settled in my gut. I will do it, I said. 2 hours later, the email arrived. It appeared in my personal inbox, the one I used for family matters, separate from my encrypted work account. The subject line was, a family moment. I opened it, bracing myself. Dearest Nyla, I hope this finds you well. Your father and I were discussing the upcoming conference this Friday. We were so surprised to see your name on the list of minor speakers. It is wonderful that you found a little job that keeps you busy. Since we are receiving the main award of the evening, we thought it would be nice if you joined us at the VIP table. It would mean so much to your father to see us united. Perhaps you can finally see that your stepmother is not the villain you make her out to be. We are doing good work, Nyla. Come see for yourself. Love, Victoria. The condescension dripped from every pixel. Minor speaker, little job. She thought I was just some low-level bureaucrat giving a safety lecture. She had no idea I was the one holding the shovel that was digging her grave. I did not reply by email. I needed to see her face. I needed to gauge the temperature in the house. I initiated a video call. It rang 3 times before she answered. The camera feed stabilized, revealing Victoria in her home office. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. She looked annoyed, as if I had interrupted a spa treatment. Nyla, she said, her tone clipped. I assume you got my invite. Are you coming to apologize? I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. I am coming to the conference, Victoria, but not to sit at your table. I have my own work to do. Victoria laughed, checking her reflection in the monitor. Work, right. You are going to lecture people on how to fill out forms. Listen, Nyla, I am offering you an olive branch here. Do not snap it. I am not interested in your olive branches. I said, I am interested in the truth. Her expression hardened instantly. The mask slipped. Let me be clear, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Do not bring your little legal grudges to my night. This is a big moment for the company. We are securing investors for a national expansion. If you do anything to embarrass us, if you make a scene, you are hurting your father. She always pivoted to him. How is Dad? I asked. Does he know about the award? Does he know what you did to get it? Victoria leaned into the camera, her eyes narrowing. Your father is fragile. Nyla. His heart is not what it used to be. The stress of business is already too much for him. If you start digging up old dirt, if you start causing trouble, the stress could kill him. Do you want that on your conscience? She was holding him hostage. She was telling me that if I fought her, I would be the one to bury him. You are despicable, I said quietly. I am pragmatic, she countered. Stay in your lane, Nyla. You are a paralegal. You are nothing. Let the adults run the business. She cut the feed. The screen went black. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to scream. She thought I was nothing. She thought I was powerless. I picked up my phone again and dialed Eli. He answered on the second ring, sounding breathless. Nyla, is everything okay? Mom is on a rampage. Eli, I said, cutting through his panic. I need you to tell me the truth, right now. I cannot talk, he stammered. I am at the station. I know you are editing the reports. Eli, I said. The silence on the other end was absolute. I know about the metadata, I continued, pressing the advantage. I know you are logging in at 2 a.m. I know you are changing the red flags to green. Eli let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Nyla, you do not understand. She makes me do it. She stands there and watches me type. She says if I do not do it, the insurance will drop us and we will lose the house. She says Dad will go to jail for the old violations. So you are protecting him by committing a felony? I asked, my voice harsh but necessary. I am just trying to keep everything from falling apart, he cried. I am just following orders. Nyla, please, do not make me choose. You are going to have to choose. Eli, I said, the conference is in 2 days. You need to decide if you are her employee or my brother. I hung up before he could answer. I needed him to be scared. I needed him to realize that the middle ground no longer existed. The breaking point came 24 hours later. It was Thursday, the day before the conference. I was at the S-Heasing office, reviewing my speech, when the alert system chimed. It was a priority notification from the Hazardous Materials Division. A minor leak had been reported at a Brightway station in the next county over. The official report came in 10 minutes later. It described a minor seal failure that spilled less than 5 gallons of fuel. The report claimed it was contained immediately and posed zero risk. But then, my secure work email pinged. It was an anonymous message. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. I opened it. It was a photograph taken with a cell phone. The image showed a computer monitor in a dark room. On the screen was the real-time sensor data for the station that had just leaked. The timestamp on the screen in the photo was from 3 hours before the minor spill. The sensor reading was not 5 gallons, it was 50 gallons, and the pressure warning had been flashing for 6 hours. The photo showed something else. In the reflection of the monitor, just barely visible, was the sleeve of a Brightway uniform, and on the wrist, a familiar watch, a cheap, digital watch that I had bought for Eli when he graduated high school. He had not sent the email from his account. He had used a burner, but he had sent it. I zoomed in on the data in the photo. There was a sticky note attached to the monitor in the picture. On it, in handwriting I recognized instantly as Victoria's, were the words, "Override the alarm until Monday. No shutdowns before the ceremony." My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the smoking gun Mason had asked for. She had ordered a safety override in writing to protect her award ceremony, and that order had caused a 50-gallon spill that they were currently lying about. And Eli, my terrified, compromised brother, had just handed me the weapon. I printed the photo. I printed the official, falsified report stating 5 gallons. I placed them side by side on my desk. Tomorrow, Victoria would stand on a stage and accept a gold trophy for safety. She would smile and talk about trust. I picked up the phone and dialed Mason. "I have it," I said. Mason did not ask what it was. He just asked one question. "Are you ready to burn the bridge?" I looked at the photo of the monitor, at the sticky note that proved my stepmother cared more about a plaque than public safety. "I am not just going to burn the bridge. Mason," I said, "I am going to blow up the foundation." The tension in the air was electric. The pieces were moving. Victoria thought she was walking into a coronation. She had no idea she was walking into an execution, and the executioner was the daughter she had dismissed as a failure. The rain that night felt less like water and more like a heavy, suffocating curtain that separated the gas station from the rest of the world. I stood there, my back pressed against the cold, rough brick of the station wall, forcing my breathing to remain steady. I was not just at any random pump. I was at Riverton Station number 4, the exact location where, 2 years ago, a mysterious fire had gutted the main kiosk. The official report, signed by my father, claimed a customer had been carelessly smoking near the vapor recovery line, but standing here now, smelling the faint, acrid ghost of old gasoline beneath the fresh rain, I knew that was a lie. Victoria stood before me, her chest heaving slightly beneath her cashmere coat. The slap she had delivered moments ago still burned on my cheek, a throbbing reminder of her volatility. But it was not the physical pain that stung the most. It was the look in her eyes. It was a look of absolute, undiluted contempt. "You are just a parasite," she spat, the words mixing with the sound of the storm. A parasite clinging to the law to destroy what I built. I straightened my jacket, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the immense effort it took to keep my hands at my sides. I was a trained investigator. I knew how to de-escalate. I knew the law. "Victoria," I said, my voice low and controlled, "you just assaulted me. We are in a public place. That is a battery charge. You need to step back." She laughed. It was a harsh, jagged sound. "A battery charge? Who is going to arrest me? Nyla? The local police? We donate to their benevolence fund every Christmas. No one stands with you. No one cares about your little rule book." She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her perfume cloying and thick. "Even your father," she whispered, leaning in so close I could see the fine lines of tension around her mouth. "He does not stand with you. He thinks you are trying to ruin his retirement. He thinks you are bitter because he chose me." That hit the target. It was the weapon she always kept sharpened. The idea that my father's complicity was actually a rejection of me. Eli stepped in then. He had been hovering by the SUV, looking like a ghost in his oversized hoodie, but the tension had snapped something inside him. He rushed forward, placing his hands gently on Victoria's arms, trying to pull her back without triggering her wrath. "Mom, stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "There are cameras. Look." He pointed vaguely toward the roof of the store. Victoria did not even look up. She shook him off like he was a pesky fly. "Let them film," she said, smoothing her lapels with a terrifying calmness. "It will just look like a family dispute, a mother disciplining an ungrateful child. Get in the car." Eli. She turned her back on me, dismissing my existence entirely. She began walking toward the driver's side of the luxury SUV, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the wet concrete. But Eli lingered. He stood there for a second, caught between the gravity of his mother and the pull of his sister. He looked at me, his eyes wide and rimmed with red. He looked so young, yet burdened with the weight of 1,000 secrets. He stepped closer, invading my space not to threaten, but to hide. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, shielding his mouth from Victoria's line of sight. "Nyla," he whispered, the words rushing out in a terrified torrent. "Don not trust the inspection files. The numbers are not right." I froze, my eyes locking onto the side of his face. "There are more leaks than the 3 you know about," he continued, his voice barely a tremor. "And Dad knows about the structural failures." "Eli!" Victoria shouted from the car, the engine roaring to life. Eli flinched, but he did not pull away yet. He had one more thing to say, the most important thing. "Do not sign anything." "Nyla," he hissed, gripping my forearm for a split second. "Whatever they send you next week, do not sign it. They are trying to transfer the liability." "Eli!" He let go of me as if he had been burned. He turned and ran to the car, shrinking back into the role of the obedient son. He climbed into the passenger seat and did not look back as the SUV peeled out of the lot, tires screeching on the wet asphalt, leaving me alone in the wash of red taillights. I stood there for a long minute, letting the rain soak into my hair. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Do not sign anything. That was the key. That was the piece of the puzzle I had been missing. It was not just about hiding safety violations to save money on repairs. It was about an exit strategy. If the tanks were failing, if the groundwater was poisoned, the cleanup costs would be in the millions. It would bankrupt the company. Victoria was not just trying to hide the leaks. She was trying to move the assets. And if Eli was warning me not to sign anything, it meant they were planning to dump the toxic assets onto someone else. Or perhaps, they were planning to restructure the family trust, making me the fall guy for a company I did not even work for. I wiped the rain from my face and looked up. I needed to secure the scene. I needed to think like the investigator I was, not the daughter I used to be. I scanned the station. Eli had pointed to the camera on the roof of the kiosk. I located it. It was a standard dome camera. Brightway property. I knew from my access to their servers that Victoria could delete that footage with a single phone call to her IT guy. That footage was likely already gone, or would be by morning. But then I looked further. Beyond the station property line, across the dark, 2-lane road, there was a utility pole, and mounted high on that pole, blinking with a steady red light, was a gray box with a lens pointed directly at the intersection. A municipal traffic camera. Riverton City property. A surge of grim satisfaction warmed my chest. Victoria owned the station. She owned the Police Benevolence Fund, but she did not own the Department of Transportation's traffic monitoring grid. That footage went to a server in the state capitol, a server that was backed up automatically and required a court order to expunge. She had assaulted a state investigator in full view of a state-owned camera. I did not call 911. Calling the local police now would result in a domestic dispute report that would get buried. Victoria would charm the responding officers, and I would look like the hysterical stepdaughter. No, I needed this to be bigger. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I snapped a photo of the utility pole, capturing the specific ID number stenciled on the side of the traffic camera box. Then I walked over to the pump where we had stood. I took a photo of the ground, capturing the scuff marks from her heels and the exact angle of sight to the camera. I took a photo of the gas price sign to establish the time and location. I was building a chain of evidence. I walked back to my car, the pain in my cheek now a dull throb that served only to focus my mind. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The interior felt safe, a capsule of silence in the chaos. I dialed Mason Reeves. It was late, but I knew he would be awake. He answered on the first ring. "Nyla?" "I was just assaulted," I said. My voice was calm, almost detached. "What?" Mason's tone shifted instantly from sleepy to alert. "Where are you? Are you safe? Do I need to send a unit?" "I am safe," I said. "I am at the Riverton site." Victoria Lane slapped me and shoved me into a wall. "I am sending the police," Mason said. "No," I interrupted. "Do not call them." "Nyla, this is assault on a state official." "If you call the local police, she spins it," I explained, watching the rain slide down the windshield. "She plays the victim. It becomes a tabloid story about a family catfight. I do not want her on a misdemeanor assault charge. Mason, I want her on everything." I took a breath. "She did it in front of a Doe-T traffic camera," I said. "I have the ID number. I want you to pull that footage tomorrow morning and seal it. Put it in the classified file for the Brightway investigation. It establishes a pattern of intimidation. It proves she is willing to use physical force to silence an inquiry." Mason was silent for a moment. "You want to use the assault as leverage for the hearing?" "I want to use it to destroy her credibility when she takes the stand." I said, "And Mason? There is something else." "What?" "My brother was there," I said, my voice softening slightly. "He warned me. He told me there are more leaks than we see in the logs, and he told me they are trying to get me to sign papers." "Financial papers?" Mason asked. "Liability papers," I guessed. "They are going to try to pin the environmental cleanup on a shell company, or maybe on the family trust. They are planning to cash out before the EPA notices the groundwater is poison." I started the engine. The dashboard lit up, casting a glow on my wet hands. "Get that footage." "Mason," I said, "and get the forensic accountants ready. I am coming back to the city." I hung up and put the car in gear. As I pulled out of the station, I looked back one last time at the neon sign of Brightway Stops. It looked bright and inviting, a beacon of safety in the dark night, but I knew what was underneath. I knew about the rotting tanks and the falsified logs. And now I knew that my father was not just a victim. He was a participant. Eli's whisper echoed in my head. "Dad knows." I merged onto the highway, the tires humming against the wet road. I touched my cheek. It was tender. "You made a mistake, Victoria," I whispered to the empty car. "You thought you were disciplining a child, but you just handed a prosecutor the final piece of evidence." I drove into the night, leaving the victim behind at the gas station. The woman driving the car was pure vengeance, and she had the law on her side. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum, mirroring the faint discoloration on my left cheekbone that even 3 layers of high-coverage concealer could not entirely hide. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my apartment, adjusting the collar of my charcoal blazer. It was high enough to cover the mark where Victoria had shoved me against the wall, but every time I turned my head too quickly, the dull ache reminded me of the rain, the smell of gasoline, and the look of absolute contempt in her eyes. I was not dressing for a conference. I was dressing for a demolition. I drove to the State Convention Center, merging into the heavy traffic of the morning commute. The venue was a massive glass and steel structure that gleamed under the gray sky, draped with a banner that spanned 40 feet, State Commercial and Energy Safety Conference. I parked in the designated speaker lot, far away from the VIP entrance where I knew the limousines would be idling. My badge was waiting for me at the side entrance. It read, Lila Lane, Senior Investigator, SCASC. It did not say Victoria Lane's disappointment. Today, those two identities were about to collide in a way that would leave wreckage for miles. I found Mason Reeves in the green room behind the main stage. The air smelled of stale coffee and nervous energy. Mason looked sharp in his navy suit, but his eyes were hard. He held a thick folder in his hands. "Here is the briefing packet for your presentation," he said, handing it to me. I took it. The weight of it felt significant. I opened the cover. The first few pages were standard demographic data about small business compliance, but the back half, the section clipped with a red binder clip, was redacted. Thick black lines crossed out names, dates, and locations. "I cannot let you read the unredacted version of the final inquiry yet," Mason said, his voice low. "Conflict of interest protocols are still in effect until the hearing is convened. But you know what is under that ink? Nyla." I nodded. I knew. Under the ink was the evidence of 3 fires, 50 gallons of spilled fuel, and a metadata log that proved my brother was being forced to commit crimes at 2 a.m. "Just deliver your speech," Mason instructed. "Set the stage. Let them get comfortable. Let them think this is just another boring government lecture. When Victoria gets up there to accept her award, that is when we move." I walked out into the wings of the stage to get a look at the house. The auditorium was cavernous, seating over 1,000 people. Round tables were set up near the front for the honorees and high-level donors. And there they were. Table 1, center stage. Victoria was holding court. She wore a tailored crimson dress that looked like it had been sculpted onto her body. She was holding a massive bouquet of white roses, leaning in to laugh at something a state senator was saying. She looked radiant. She looked untouchable. My father, Richard, stood beside her. From this distance, he looked like a ghost. His tuxedo seemed a size too large, hanging off his shoulders. He was smiling, but it was a tight, grimace-like expression that did not reach his eyes. He kept checking his watch, shifting his weight from foot to foot as if the floor were hot. And then I saw Eli. My brother was not sitting. He was pacing near the buffet line, ostensibly checking on the catering for the Brightway team, but his body language screamed panic. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched. Every time someone laughed too loudly, he flinched. He was terrified. He knew what he had whispered to me. He knew the bomb was ticking, but he did not know when it would go off. I pulled back into the shadows just as the house lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a voice like polished brass, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, to open our session on corporate responsibility, please welcome a rising voice in the field of industrial compliance. She is a senior investigator with the State Commission, specializing in safety culture within family-owned enterprises. Please welcome Ms. Nyla Lane." There was polite applause. I walked out into the spotlight. The glare was blinding. I could not see the faces in the back, but I could see table 1 perfectly. I saw Victoria's head snap up. She froze, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. She had known I was speaking. I had told her. But seeing me there, legitimate and commanded by the state seal on the podium, seemed to jar her. Richard looked confused, squinting through his glasses. Eli stopped pacing and went perfectly still near the wall. I adjusted the microphone. I did not smile. "Good morning," I began. My voice was steady, amplified to fill the room. "We often talk about safety as a series of checklists," I said, making eye contact with the front row. "We talk about valve pressure and sensor calibration. We talk about flow rates and containment protocols. But in my experience, the most dangerous component in any system is not a faulty pipe. It is a leader who believes they are too important to fail." The room went quiet. It was a standard opening, but I infused it with a specific gravity. I clicked the remote, bringing up a slide showing a generic graph of accident rates. When we investigate disasters, we rarely find that the machinery simply decided to break. I continued. We find a paper trail. We find a manager who ignored a warning light because it was cheaper to put a piece of tape over it. We find a CEO who decided that the quarterly earnings report was more important than the groundwater report. I looked directly at Victoria. She was staring back at me, her face a mask of bored amusement. She leaned over and whispered something to my father. He nodded weakly. "Data does not lie," I said, my voice hardening. "You can edit a spreadsheet. You can delete an email. You can intimidate a junior employee into changing a red flag to a green one. But physics does not care about your stock price. Eventually, the pipe bursts. Eventually, the truth leaks out." I finished my 20-minute presentation to respectful applause. I did not bow. I simply gathered my notes and walked off stage right, descending the stairs to take my assigned seat, not at the family table, but 3 rows back, in the section reserved for state employees. The program moved on. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting. And then it was time. "Our final award of the morning," the MC announced, his voice booming with excitement. "The Golden Shield is the highest honor for safety and community trust. This year, we honor a company that has revitalized our local infrastructure. Please welcome the CEO of Brightway Stops, Mrs. Victoria Lane." Music swelled. The room erupted in applause. Victoria stood up, smoothing her dress, and glided up the stairs to the stage. She accepted the heavy glass trophy, beaming like a beauty queen. Richard and Eli remained on the floor, Richard clapping slowly, Eli staring at his shoes. Victoria took the microphone. She waited for the applause to die down, savoring the silence. "Thank you," she said, her voice dripping with false humility. "This award belongs to my family, to my husband, Richard, who built the foundation, and to my son, Eli, who represents our future." She gestured to them. The spotlight swung to table 1. Richard waved awkwardly. Eli did not move. "Safety is personal to us," Victoria continued, her tone shifting into that conversational, storytelling mode she used to manipulate dinner guests. "You know, listening to the previous speaker?" She paused, offering a small, indulgent chuckle. "It was funny to see Ms. Lane up here. You see, Nyla is my stepdaughter." A ripple of surprise went through the room. People turned to look at me. I sat stone still. "We love her dearly," Victoria said, smiling piteously. "But if we ran our business the way Nyla sees the world, we would never open our doors. Nyla has always been spirited. Since she was a teenager, she has seen danger in every shadow." There was a light laughter from the crowd. She was charming them. She was painting me as the hysterical woman. "I remember once," she continued, leaning on the podium, "she tried to convince her father that our garage door opener was a lethal weapon because it made a funny noise. She loves to find problems where there are none. She calls it compliance. We call it being a little too dramatic." The laughter grew louder. My face felt hot, but I did not look away. She was digging the hole deeper. Every word she said was another nail in her credibility. "But that is why we are the ones running the business," Victoria said, her voice swelling with pride. "Because true leadership is about knowing the difference between a real risk and a paranoid fantasy. Brightway has a perfect safety record because we focus on reality, not fear. We have never had a major incident. We have never endangered our community, and this award proves that we are doing it right." She lifted the trophy high. "Thank you for believing in us." The audience roared. Victoria basked in the adulation, the queen of the moment. She looked down at me, her eyes locking onto mine across the sea of heads. It was a look of total victory. She thought she had won. She thought she had publicly neutered me, turning my professional warning into a family joke. The applause began to fade. The MC stepped forward to wrap up. "Thank you, Mrs. Lane. Now, we have time for a brief—" "Excuse me." The voice did not come from the stage. It came from the center of the room. It was not loud, but it projected with an authority that cut through the murmurs like a knife. A woman stood up from the aisle seat in the 5th row. She was tall, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and a suit that cost more than Victoria's car. It was Eleanor Price, the chairwoman of the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission, my ultimate boss, the woman who signed the shutdown orders. The room fell silent. Everyone knew Eleanor Price. The MC faltered. "Oh, Chairwoman Price, we were just moving to the closing remarks." "I have a question for the recipient," Eleanor said, walking toward the stage. She did not ask for a microphone. She did not need one. Victoria's smile faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, she gripped the podium. "Chairwoman Price, I am honored. I did not know you were attending." "I am sure you did not," Eleanor said. Stopping at the foot of the stairs, she looked up at Victoria, her expression completely unreadable. "You just stated that Brightway has a perfect safety record," Eleanor said. "You stated that you focus on reality, not fear, and you claimed that your stepdaughter, Senior Investigator Lane, is prone to imagining risks." Victoria let out a nervous laugh. "Well, it was just a family anecdote. Chairwoman, a little humor." "I am not laughing," Eleanor said. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed. 300 heads turned from Eleanor to Victoria and back again. Eleanor reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "I have a report here, dated 3 days ago, regarding the station at Riverton Exit 14. Eleanor said, "It is an internal report from your own server. It logs a pressure failure in the main underground tank." Victoria went pale beneath her makeup. That must be a mistake. We have no open tickets." Eleanor ignored her. "And I have a second document here. A photograph of a sticky note attached to a monitor, ordering the manual override of a safety alarm to prevent a shutdown before this ceremony." Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Richard, who had gone as white as the tablecloth. She looked at Eli, but Eli was looking at me. "And finally," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down my spine, "I have video footage from a Department of Transportation traffic camera. It shows the CEO of a company receiving a safety award, physically assaulting a state investigator behind a gas station dumpster." The gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen out of the room. "So, Mrs. Lane," Eleanor said, holding the paper up. "My question is this. When you said you have never endangered your community, were you including the 50 gallons of fuel currently leaking into the Riverton water table, or were you just hoping we would not find it until after you left the stage?" I watched Victoria. I watched the confidence drain out of her face like water from a cracked vessel. She looked at the trophy in her hand, then at the audience, and finally, she looked at me. I did not look away. I did not smile. I just sat there, the bruise on my cheek hidden, but the truth fully exposed. The trap had snapped shut. The silence that descended upon the auditorium was heavy enough to crush bone. Eleanor Price stood on the stage, a monolith in a charcoal suit, creating a stark contrast to Victoria's shimmering crimson gown. The Golden Shield trophy was still clutched in my stepmother's hand, but it no longer looked like a prize. It looked like a paperweight she did not know where to set down. Eleanor did not shout. She did not need to. She possessed the kind of quiet authority that made microphones redundant, though she held one now. Her grip relaxed but firm. She turned to face Victoria, blocking the audience's view of the celebratory banner. "Mrs. Lane," Eleanor began, her voice echoing clearly through the hall, "you just stated to this assembly that Brightway Stops has a safety record that is, to quote you directly, nearly perfect." Victoria's smile was fixed, a rictus of porcelain and panic. "That is correct, Chairwoman. We pride ourselves on our diligence." Eleanor nodded slowly, as if digesting a lie she had already tasted. "And as the CEO, you can confirm that you have personally reviewed all safety protocols, maintenance logs, and engineer recommendations for your sites over the last 3 years? You are the final decision-maker, are you not?" Victoria straightened her spine, falling back on the script she had rehearsed for years. "Absolutely. Nothing happens at Brightway without my approval. I am involved in every detail. That is why our standards are so high." "Excellent," Eleanor said. She signaled to the tech booth at the back of the room. A beam of light cut through the darkness, hitting the massive projection screen behind the stage. The celebratory logo of the Golden Shield vanished, replaced by the stark, white glare of a scanned document. Then perhaps you can explain this. It was an email. The font was large enough for people in the back row to read. The sender was identified clearly. V. Lane Exec. The recipient was the regional maintenance manager. The date was 18 months ago. Eleanor turned to the screen and read the highlighted text aloud, her voice devoid of emotion. Do not use the word dangerous in any official correspondence regarding the tank linings. It creates liability. Use the phrase upgrade recommended. We need to control the narrative, not fix pipes that are still technically functional. A murmur rippled through the crowd. These were business owners, insurers, and safety officers. They knew the code. They knew that changing dangerous to upgrade recommended was the difference between a mandatory shutdown and a deferred expense. Victoria let out a short, breathy laugh, waving her hand dismissively. Chairwoman, that is standard management speak. We were discussing budget prioritization. You are taking a single sentence out of context to make it sound sinister. Context is important, Eleanor agreed. She clicked a small remote in her hand. The slide changed. This is a technical report from your lead engineer regarding the station at North Riverton, dated 6 months ago. The screen showed a grim assessment. The text read, Vapor recovery unit failing. Risk of static discharge in the primary containment zone is critical. If we do not close the station for repairs, the risk of explosion is significant. Eleanor turned back to Victoria. And here is your reply, sent 12 minutes later. The next slide appeared. It was short. Do not close the station. We are in the middle of a revenue drive. Mark the sensor as recalibrating and keep the pumps open. Monitor the situation. If it blows, we have insurance. If we close, we lose market share. The gasp from the audience was audible this time. If it blows, we have insurance. That was not management speak. That was a calculation of human life against a payout policy. Victoria took a step back, her heels wobbling slightly. That is a fabrication. I never wrote that. Our email servers are secure. You have been fed fake documents by a disgruntled employee. She shot a look toward the side of the stage, searching for Eli, but my brother was pressed against the back wall, his face the color of ash, his hands gripping the velvet curtains as if they were the only thing holding him upright. He knew those emails were real. He had watched her type them. We verified the cryptographic signatures on the server logs, Eleanor said coldly. These are your words, Mrs. Lane. You knowingly kept a station open that your own engineers warned could explode. I watched from my seat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The vindication was a cold, sharp thing in my chest. Victoria was not looking at the audience anymore. She was looking at Richard. My father was staring up at the screen, his mouth slightly open, reading the words his wife had written. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma to find his house had burned down years ago. Victoria tried to pivot. She moved toward the podium, trying to reclaim the microphone, trying to physically block the screen with her body. This is an ambush, she declared, her voice rising, cracking with strain. You are trying to sabotage a successful female-led business. This is political. I will not stand here and be lectured about safety by a bureaucrat who has never run a company. We have never had a major incident. Never? Eleanor asked. She clicked the remote again. The screen changed. This time, it was not a document. It was a video player interface. The timestamp at the top showed a date from 3 days ago. The location tag read, Riverton Exit. 14. DOT Traffic Cam 882. I sat up straighter. This was it. Victoria squinted at the screen. That is just a gas station. What is this? Did someone drive off without paying? Is that the big crime? Eleanor lowered the remote. We expanded our investigation. Mrs. Lane, we wanted to see how the leadership of Brightway handles a crisis in real time. We pulled footage from the municipal grid surrounding your properties. She pressed play. The video was grainy but clear. It showed the wet pavement of the gas station at night. It showed a black SUV parked aggressively next to a sedan. It showed a woman in a distinctive cream-colored coat, the same coat Victoria had worn in her Entrepreneur of the Year profile photos, drag another woman toward the back wall. The audience went dead silent. On the massive screen, 50 feet tall, they watched Victoria Lane shove the other woman against the brickwork. They saw the aggressive body language. They saw the finger-pointing. And then, in a moment that made the entire room flinch, they saw the slap. It was a violent, uncontrolled strike, even without sound. The force of it was undeniable. The victim's head snapped back. The aggressor leaned in, screaming something into her face. Victoria stared at the screen, her eyes wide with horror. She had thought she was safe in the shadows of the dumpster. She had forgotten that the world is always watching. "That," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen, "that is personal. That is a family matter. My stepdaughter was hysterical. I was trying to calm her down. She was threatening me." Eleanor paused the video on the frame where Victoria's hand was making contact with the victim's face. "You call this calming someone down?" Eleanor asked. "She was out of control," Victoria screamed, losing her composure entirely. "She is mentally unstable. She has been harassing us for years. I had to restrain her." Eleanor stepped closer to Victoria, invading her personal space just as Victoria had invaded mine 3 nights ago. "The woman you are assaulting in this video is not just your stepdaughter," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a register that carried the weight of the entire state government. "She is Lila Lane, and she is a senior lead investigator for the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Hundreds of heads turned in my direction. I did not hide. I did not look down. I stood up slowly from my seat in the 3rd row. Victoria looked at me. For the first time, she saw the badge clipped to my belt. She saw the calm, professional demeanor of the woman she had dismissed as a failure. She realized that the little job she had mocked was the very instrument of her destruction. "You attacked a state official who was conducting an active investigation into your company," Eleanor continued, hammering the final nail into the coffin. "You did it on camera. You did it to silence her. And then you came here, accepted an award, and lied to this entire room about your integrity." Victoria looked around wildly. She looked at the audience, but there were no friendly faces left. The senator she had been laughing with was studying his phone. The donors were whispering to each other. "Richard," she pleaded, turning to my father. "Richard, tell them Lila is lying. Tell them she is just jealous." My father stood up. He looked at the screen, where the email about insurance payouts was still visible in the corner. He looked at the video of his wife striking his daughter. He looked at me, standing tall in the aisle. He did not speak. He sank back into his chair and put his head in his hands. Eleanor turned back to the microphone. "I am revoking the Golden Shield Award effective immediately," she announced, "and I am placing the entire Brightway network under emergency administrative review." Victoria lunged for the microphone, her face twisted in fury. "You cannot do this. I am Brightway. I built this. You have no right." "Security," Eleanor barked. 2 uniformed officers stepped out from the wings. They were not the private event security. They were state troopers. But the real blow was yet to come. Eleanor looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was my turn. The documents were the weapon, but the witness was the executioner, and the witness was not me. Eleanor looked past Victoria, toward the shadows of the stage. "Mr. Eli Lane," she said into the microphone, "please step forward. We have some questions about the metadata on these files." Victoria spun around. "Eli?" My brother stepped out of the shadows. He was shaking, but he was walking. He walked past his mother, past the trophy she had dropped on the floor, and stood next to Eleanor. He did not look at Victoria. He looked at me. And in that moment, the dynasty of Brightway stops did not just crack, it shattered. The silence in the convention center was absolute, a heavy physical weight that pressed down on every pair of shoulders in the room. 1,000 eyes turned in unison, shifting from the horrifying image froze on the screen to the woman sitting in the third row. Me. Chairwoman Eleanor Price did not let the moment dissolve into chaos. She controlled the room with the precision of a surgeon. She extended a hand toward the audience, her palm open, her gesture commanding. "I would like to invite Senior Investigator Lila Lane to the stage," Eleanor said, her voice amplified and echoing through the rafters. The woman Mrs. Lane just used as an anecdote of failure, the woman she called pessimistic, and the woman who has been leading the task force into Brightway stops for the last 5 months. I stood up. My left hip throbbed with a dull, grinding ache, a souvenir from where Victoria had shoved me into the brick wall of the gas station. It was a sharp reminder of the rain and the humiliation, but as I moved into the aisle, I did not let it slow me down. I walked with a purpose. I could feel the gaze of the room on me, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and dawning horror. I walked past the VIP tables. I walked past the donors in their tuxedos and the politicians who were suddenly checking their phones, desperate to distance themselves from the woman on stage. I walked past my father. Richard Lane looked up at me as I passed. His face was gray, drained of blood. His mouth moved slightly, forming my name, but no sound came out. He looked like a man watching a tsunami hit his house, realizing too late that he had left the windows open. I climbed the stairs to the stage. The lights were blindingly hot. I stepped up to the podium, standing next to Eleanor, and turned to face my stepmother. Victoria was trembling. It was a fine, high-frequency vibration that ran through her rigid posture, up close, beneath the layers of foundation and powder. I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her eyes darted from me to the screen and back again, searching for an exit that did not exist. "Ms. Lane," Eleanor said, speaking into her microphone but looking at me. "For the record, do you consent to the use of your personal testimony, as well as the surveillance footage obtained from the Department of Transportation, as evidence in this administrative review?" I leaned toward the microphone. My voice was calm, steadier than it had been in years. "I do," I said. Eleanor nodded. She clicked the remote. The video on the screen unpaused. The audience watched in rapt silence. The grainy footage played out the scene again. Victoria's arm lashing out, my head snapping back, the shove, the way she loomed over me, finger pointed, screaming in my face while I stood with my back to a high-voltage air compressor unit. Eleanor spoke over the video, her tone clinical. "This is not just an assault," she explained to the hushed room. "This is a CEO demonstrating a complete lack of judgment in a hazardous zone. We are looking at a fuel retail environment. Vapors are present. Heavy machinery is operating. And here is the owner of the company, engaging in physical violence less than 10 feet from a fuel pump." Eleanor paused the video again, freezing the image on Victoria's snarling face. If a junior employee did this, they would be fired for gross negligence and safety violation. Eleanor said, "When the owner does it, it suggests that the culture of safety she just bragged about is nothing more than a myth." Victoria snapped. She lunged toward the microphone, grabbing the stand with white-knuckled desperation. "This is a setup!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, stripping away the polished veneer of the businesswoman of the year. "You are twisting everything. That is my daughter. We were having an argument. Since when is a family argument a crime?" She spun around, looking for an ally, looking for anyone who would help her hold up the collapsing sky. Her eyes landed on my father, who was still slumped in his chair at the front table. "Richard!" she yelled, her voice echoing painfully in the stunned room. "Say something. Tell them. Tell them Lila is unstable. Tell them she is doing this to hurt us because she is jealous." The room turned to Richard Lane. The spotlight drifted, catching him in its unforgiving glare. He looked old. He looked broken. He looked at his wife, the woman who had promised to save his company. And then he looked at me, the daughter he had allowed her to push away. He started to stand up, his legs shaking. He gripped the tablecloth for support. He looked at Victoria, and for a moment, I saw the old habit kick in, the instinct to smooth things over, to agree, to capitulate. But then he looked at the screen. He saw the image of his wife striking his child, and he saw me, standing on stage with a badge on my belt, waiting for him to finally be a father. Richard opened his mouth. He looked at Victoria, his eyes wet. He stammered. "Richard," Victoria hissed. A command, not a plea. "I cannot," Richard whispered. The microphone on the table caught it. It was a small sound, but it was the sound of a dam breaking. "I cannot do it anymore. Victoria." Victoria recoiled as if he had slapped her. She looked at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You useless old man," she muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. Eleanor stepped forward, reclaiming the attention of the room. "The assault is a serious matter, Mrs. Lane," Eleanor said, "but it is not the reason we are here. It is merely a symptom of the disease." Eleanor picked up a new folder from the podium. She held it up. "You claimed earlier that the emails we showed were fake. You claimed that no one in your company would ever put public safety second to profit." Eleanor opened the folder. "We did not just find these documents on a server scan," she said. "We received them directly. A whistleblower inside Brightway Stops provided us with a comprehensive cache of data. This individual provided the original logs, the altered metadata, and the specific dates and times that you, Victoria Lane, ordered the falsification of safety records." Victoria froze. Her eyes widened. "A whistleblower?" she whispered. "That is impossible. My staff is loyal. I vet everyone." "This person is a senior employee," Eleanor continued. "Someone with administrative access. Someone who was in the room when the decisions were made. Someone who was forced to make the changes under duress, but kept the originals because they knew that one day, the truth would have to come out." I watched Victoria's mind work. She was running through the list of her managers, her shift leads, her accountants. She was calculating who had betrayed her. And then, the realization hit her. It was a slow, dawning horror that started in her eyes and spread to her entire body. "No," she breathed. Eleanor gestured to the lighting technician. "May we have the house lights on the center aisle, please?" The beam of light swung from the stage, cutting through the darkness of the auditorium. It swept over the tables, over the frozen faces of the guests, and landed near the back wall, where the catering staff had been standing. It landed on a young man in a cheap suit, clutching a stack of brochures he had been too terrified to hand out. Eli. My brother stood in the circle of light. He looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His face was pale, his eyes wide and terrified, but he did not run. He stood there, holding the weight of the moment on his narrow shoulders. The audience gasped. The murmurs erupted into a roar of whispers. The sun, the air, the boy Victoria had just praised as the future of the company. Victoria stared at him from the stage. Her mouth opened and closed. "Eli," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and fury. "What are you doing?" Eli took a step back, as if her voice were a physical blow, but he did not retreat into the shadows. Eleanor spoke into the microphone. "Mr. Eli Lane, please join us on stage." Victoria shook her head violently. No, he is a child. He does not know what he is doing. You manipulated him. Nyla manipulated him." She pointed at me, her finger shaking. "You poisoned him against me. You turned my own son against me." I stepped forward then. I moved between Victoria and the stairs, creating a physical barrier between her and the boy who was walking slowly down the aisle. "He is not a child. Victoria," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "He is 21 years old, and he is not your shield anymore." Eli reached the stairs. He walked up them slowly, his steps heavy. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at the cameras. He looked only at me. When he reached the top of the stairs, he came to stand beside me. I put a hand on his shoulder. I could feel him trembling. vibrating with the adrenaline of the moment, but he stood firm. Victoria looked at the two of us standing there, the stepdaughter she had cast out and the son she had tried to mold into her own image. We stood together, a united front of broken things that had finally decided to bite back. "Eli," Victoria pleaded, switching tactics instantly, her voice becoming soft, wheedling. "Baby, tell them you did not send those files. Tell them your sister stole your password. We can fix this. Just tell them it was a mistake." Eli looked at her. For the first time in his life, he looked at his mother not as a god he had to appease, but as a person who had done wrong. "I cannot. Mom," he said. His voice was quiet, amplified by the microphone Eleanor held out to him. "I cannot fix it anymore. I sent them the files." "Why?" Victoria whispered, the word escaping her like a dying breath. "Because I do not want to go to jail for you," Eli said, his voice gaining a fraction more strength. "And because Nyla was right. You are going to get someone killed." The silence that followed was final. It was the sound of a rain ending. Victoria Lane stood alone on one side of the stage, the Golden Shield trophy lying on the floor where she had dropped it, surrounded by the ruins of her reputation. On the other side stood me and Eli, flanked by the chairwoman of the Safety Commission. Eleanor stepped forward. "We have a few questions for you, Mr. Lane," she said, "and we are going to ask them right now, in front of the people your mother claimed to protect." She turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer an awards ceremony. This is now an open hearing." I squeezed Eli's shoulder. He looked at me and gave a tiny, terrified nod. We were in the eye of the storm now, but for the first time, we were not alone. The microphone at the center of the stage was designed to amplify speeches about quarterly growth and market synergy, but as my brother stepped up to it, the device seemed to amplify only the terrified rattle of his breathing. Eli gripped the sides of the lucite podium until his knuckles turned the color of bone. He was 21 years old, legally a man, but in that moment, under the harsh glare of the spotlights and the heavy silence of 300 stunned professionals, he looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Mr. Lane," Eleanor Price said, her voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. She stood just to his right, acting less like a prosecutor and more like a guide through a minefield. "State your full name and your position within Brightway Stops." Eli licked his lips. He leaned forward, flinching slightly as his voice boomed through the auditorium speakers. "Eli Richard Lane," he said, his voice shaking. "I am the Regional Operations Manager for the Riverton and North County districts." "And how long have you held this position?" Eleanor asked. "Since I turned 18, Eli answered. Eleanor nodded, holding up the folder containing the altered metadata logs. "You are aware that under state law, falsifying safety records for a fuel retail entity is a felony offense?" "I am," Eli whispered. "And yet," Eleanor continued, turning a page in the file, "we have logs showing your unique user ID accessing the central compliance server at 2, 3, and 4 in the morning on multiple occasions over the last 18 months. During these sessions, critical alerts regarding tank pressure and line integrity were manually downgraded from red to green. Did you perform these actions?" I stood a few feet away, watching my brother's profile. I saw a bead of sweat track down his temple. This was the moment. He could lie. He could claim his password was stolen. He could try to save himself. Eli closed his eyes for a second. "Yes," he said, "I performed the edits." "Why?" Eleanor asked. The word hung in the air. "Because the system would not let us open the stations if the status was red," Eli said, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. "The automated locks shut down the pumps. We needed them open for the morning rush." "Who told you to do this?" Eleanor asked. "Was it your idea to override the safety locks?" "No," Eli said quickly. "No. I wanted to call the technicians. I wanted to close the stations. I saw the leaks. I smelled the gas in the soil." "Then who gave the order?" Eleanor pressed. Eli opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. He looked at the table where our father sat with his head in his hands. Then, slowly, he turned his head to look at Victoria. My stepmother stood frozen near the edge of the stage, her face a mask of disbelief. She had spent years molding Eli, turning him into her perfect little soldier, her spy, her ally against me. She never imagined the weapon she forged would turn in her hand. The emails came from the account v.laneexec, Eli said, his voice clear now. But it was not just emails. She stood behind me. She sat in my office at the station and watched me type. She told me that the sensors were overly sensitive. She told me that if we closed for repairs, the bank would call in the loans and Dad would lose the house. "Liar," Victoria screamed. The sound tore through the room, raw and ugly. She lunged forward, her face twisted. "He is lying. She brainwashed him. Nyla has been working on him for months. She is trying to steal my company." She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes wild. "You did this! You poisoned him!" "Sit down." "Mrs. Lane." Eleanor barked into her microphone. Her voice did not rise in panic. It dropped into a command tone that brooked no argument. "This is an administrative hearing of the State Commission. You will maintain order, or I will have the troopers remove you in handcuffs right now." The 2 state troopers stepped closer to Victoria. She stopped, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between the officers and the audience. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that this was not a dinner party she could charm her way out of. She sank back against the heavy velvet curtain, seething, silent. Eleanor turned back to Eli. "Continue. Mr. Lane, you said she supervised the edits. Was there ever a time a professional engineer intervened?" Eli nodded. 4 months ago, the lead engineer for the district, Mr. Henderson, he found a crack in the primary feeder line at the downtown station. He issued a code black. That means immediate shutdown. "And what happened?" "My stepmother called me," Eli said. "She put me on speakerphone with Henderson. She told him that a code black would ruin our quarterly projection. She told him to classify it as a minor seal sweat and keep the pumps running." "And when Mr. Henderson refused?" Eleanor asked. Eli looked down at his hands, gripping the podium. She told him that if he filed the code black, she would file a counter-report claiming he was incompetent and ensure he never worked in this state again. She told me to override his lockout code." "And you did?" "I did," Eli whispered. "I was scared." She said it was just business. I felt a cold ache in my chest. I looked at my brother and saw the years of torment he had endured while I was away, building my career and my wall of indifference. He had been in the trenches, being forced to choose between his morals and his family's survival. He had been an accessory to a crime before he was old enough to buy a beer. Eleanor lowered the folder. The evidence was damning. But there was one piece missing, the piece that explained why we were here, at a public conference, instead of in a police interrogation room. "Mr. Lane," Eleanor said softly, "you sent these files to the commission anonymously 3 days ago. You sent us the proof that will likely destroy this company. Why? Why did you not just go to your sister? She is a senior investigator. She could have protected you." Eli turned to me then. His eyes were red, rimmed with tears that he was fighting to hold back. The mask of the corporate heir crumbled, leaving only the little brother who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. "I could not tell you." "Nyla," he said, his voice breaking. "Why?" I asked, speaking for the first time, my voice barely more than a breath into the microphone. "Because I knew what you would do," Eli said. "I knew that if you saw the real logs, you would not just fine us. You would burn Brightway to the ground. You would launch a full criminal probe." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "And if you did that, Dad would lose everything. The house, the pension, his reputation. I thought I could fix it from the inside. I thought if I just kept the pumps running, we could make enough money to fix the pipes before anyone got hurt. I was trying to save him." The room was silent. The tragedy of it hung heavy in the air. A son committing crimes to save his father from the consequences of his own weakness. But then, Eli took a breath, and his gaze hardened. But then the accident happened at Riverton, he said, and then she hit you. He looked at Victoria, who was staring at him with a look of betrayal so profound it was almost physical. At the gas station, Eli said, turning back to the audience, when I whispered to Nyla, I did not just tell her about the safety reports. Eleanor leaned in. What else did you say? Mr. Lane? I told her not to sign the papers, Eli said. What papers? My stepmother has been working with the lawyers for weeks, Eli said. They are drafting a restructuring of the family trust. They are moving the toxic assets, the stations with the leaks, the ones facing EPA fines, into a separate holding company, and the trust documents. They are designed to transfer the liability to the beneficiaries. The audience let out a collective gasp. A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. It was one thing to be a negligent CEO. It was another to frame your own stepchildren for your environmental crimes. She was going to ask you to sign a waiver. Nyla, Eli said to me, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. She was going to tell you it was just a formality to release your share of the inheritance early, but it was a trap. If you signed, you would have accepted personal liability for the cleanup costs. She was going to bankrupt you to save herself. I stared at him. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The sudden invitation to the conference, the olive branch email, the pressure to make peace. It wasn't about family. It was about setting me up to take the fall for millions of dollars in environmental damage. But that is not all, is it? Eleanor asked. Her voice was gentle now, prompting him to finish. You said something else to your sister. You said something about your father. Eli looked down at Richard Lane. My father was weeping silently, his shoulders shaking. I told her. Eli choked out. I told her that Dad knows. He looked at me, pleading for forgiveness. Dad knows about the leaks. Nyla, he knows about the overrides. He has seen the emails. He signed off on the budget cuts. No, I whispered, though I knew it was true. He did it because he is tired, Eli said, his voice rising in defense of the man who had failed us both. He did it because he is scared of her. He told me once that he just wanted peace. He signed whatever she put in front of him because he did not want to fight anymore. Eli looked at me, his eyes wide and desperate. I did not tell you because I was afraid. Nyla, I was afraid that if you knew Dad was a part of it, you would leave us forever. I was afraid you would hate him, and I did not want to be alone with her. The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. He had protected the father who would not protect him, and he had lied to the sister who could have saved him, all out of fear of abandonment. I looked at Victoria. She was not looking at Eli. She was looking at the floor, her face pale. She knew it was over, the financial scheme, the safety cover-up, the family facade. It had all been stripped away in 10 minutes of testimony. I walked over to Eli. I did not hug him, not yet. The cameras were rolling, and we were still in a hearing. I placed my hand over his on the podium, covering his white-knuckled grip with my own. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was steady, cold, and final. You are not a child anymore. Eli, I said, my words echoing to the back of the room. You do not have to protect them. I looked at Richard, then at Victoria. And I am not a victim anymore. I continued. I am not the daughter who runs away. I turned back to Eleanor Price. Madam Chairwoman, I said, the witness has provided sufficient testimony to establish criminal intent and conspiracy to defraud. We are done with secrets. From this moment on, we let the law speak for the rest of us. Eleanor nodded, her face grim. Agreed, she said. She signaled to the troopers. They began to move toward the stage, not for Eli, but for the woman in the crimson dress who had thought she was untouchable. The transition from the grand ballroom to the executive conference room was immediate and jarring. Chairwoman Eleanor Price did not give Victoria time to rally her public relations team or spin a narrative to the press. under the authority of the State Commercial and Infrastructure Safety Commission. She convened an emergency administrative hearing right there in the convention center, inside a windowless room usually reserved for breakout sessions. The atmosphere was sterile and cold, stripped of the golden lighting and applause of the main hall. A long mahogany table had been commandeered as a makeshift bench for the three-person commission panel. Microphones were set up on stands, their wires trailing across the carpet like black snakes. A projector hummed in the corner, throwing a harsh blue light against the white wall. On one side sat Victoria, her expensive crimson dress now looking like a costume from a play that had been canceled. Beside her sat Arthur Sterling, the general counsel for Brightway, who had been attending the gala and now looked like a man trying to stop a flood with a paper cup. On the other side sat me and Eli. Richard sat in the back row, alone. "This is not a court of law," Arthur Sterling began, smoothing his tie with nervous hands. He was trying to project confidence, but his voice was thin. "This is a premature ambush. You are basing this entire proceeding on interpretation. The emails you displayed regarding internal language are standard corporate communications. There is no direct evidence that any specific accident was caused by willful negligence. You are criminalizing management style." Eleanor Price did not look up from the file she was reading. She waited for him to finish. Then she signaled to the clerk. "Exhibit A," she stated. The screen on the wall changed. It was not an email this time. It was a photograph taken inside the underground casing of the Riverton North Station. It showed a primary fuel feed pipe. The metal was not just rusted, it was eaten through. A dark, oily sludge was visible pooling in the containment sump, dangerously close to the overflow valve. This photograph was taken 48 hours ago by a state inspector, acting on the coordinates provided by Mr. Eli Lane. Eleanor said. Her voice was dry, devoid of theatrics. "Mr. Sterling, you call this management style. The state calls it an imminent environmental catastrophe. The corrosion levels here suggest this leak has been active for 6 months." Sterling shifted in his seat. "We were unaware of the severity." "You were unaware because your CEO ordered the sensors to be recalibrated to ignore it," Eleanor interrupted. She held up a sworn affidavit. "We have a statement here from Mr. Henderson, your former lead engineer. He confirms that he was threatened with termination if he reported this specific leak. He states that Mrs. Lane told him, and I quote, 'The ground absorbs everything eventually.'" Victoria flinched. She stared at the table, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. Eleanor turned to me. "Ms. Lane," she said, "I want to address the video footage from the gas station." The screen flickered again. The grainy image of the assault appeared. Victoria shoving me, the slap, the screaming face. "Mr. Sterling would argue that this is a family dispute," Eleanor said, "but I see a business owner physically intimidating a state investigator at the site of a known hazard. Ms. Lane, in your professional opinion, did you feel that this attack was personal, or was it an attempt to stop your inquiry?" I leaned into the microphone. I looked at Victoria. For years, I had been afraid of her. I had been afraid of her sharp tongue, her financial control, her ability to make me feel small. But looking at her now, stripped of her podium and her applause, she looked small. "It was both," I said, my voice steady. "She attacked me because I am her stepdaughter and she despises me. But she stopped me from looking at the pumps because she knew what was underneath them. She assaulted me to protect the lie." Arthur Sterling interjected quickly. "My client was under extreme stress. It was a lapse in judgment. Surely, Ms. Lane, for the sake of your father and the family reputation, you would consider withdrawing the complaint regarding the physical altercation? We can settle that privately." The room went silent. It was the classic move. Appeal to the victim's guilt. Use the family bond as a weapon to silence the truth. I turned to look at Richard. My father raised his head. His eyes were red, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who had spent a decade walking on eggshells. "Ms. Lane?" Eleanor asked. "Do you wish to withdraw the assault complaint to preserve family harmony?" I thought about the years of Sunday dinners where I was made the butt of the joke. I thought about Eli, trembling in his office at 2 a.m, forced to commit crimes. I thought of the bruise on my hip. No, I said clearly. Victoria's head snapped up. I am an adult, I continued, my voice hardening. I have a right to be safe. I have a right to do my job without being physically attacked. The fact that she is my stepmother does not give her immunity. It makes the betrayal worse. I will not withdraw anything. Eleanor nodded. She turned her gaze to the back of the room. Mr. Richard Lane, she said, please step forward. My father stood up slowly. He walked to the witness chair like a man walking to the gallows. He sat down, looking at no one. Mr. Lane, Eleanor said, we have testimony that you were aware of the falsified reports. We also have drafts of legal documents, provided by your son, that suggest a restructuring of the family trust. Richard took a shaky breath. Yes, he whispered. Can you explain the intent of these documents? Eleanor asked. Specifically, the clause regarding your daughter, Nyla? Richard closed his eyes. A tear leaked out, tracking through the wrinkles on his cheek. The new will, he began, his voice raspy. It stated that Nyla would receive an early payout of $50,000, but the fine print transferred the liability of the Riverton and North County sites to her name. It was buried in the indemnity clause. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. Even Sterling, the lawyer, looked uncomfortable. Attempting to frame your own child for environmental crimes was a level of malice that went beyond corporate greed. Did you agree to this, Mr. Lane? Eleanor asked gently. I signed it, Richard said, his voice breaking into a sob. I signed it last week. Why? Because I was afraid. Richard cried out, the sound echoing off the walls. I was afraid it would all fall down. Victoria said it was the only way to save the house. She said Nyla was strong, that Nyla could handle the legal fight, but that we would be ruined. I am so sorry. Nyla, I am so sorry. I watched him weep. A part of me wanted to go to him, but a larger part of me remained frozen. He had sold me out. He had agreed to sacrifice my future to save his comfort. That was not something a hug could fix. Eleanor Price stacked her papers. She did not need to hear any more. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table. The commission has heard enough to make a preliminary ruling, she announced. She looked straight at Victoria. Mrs. Lane, effective immediately, the operating license for Brightway Stops is suspended statewide. All locations are ordered to cease fuel sales and lock down their pumps pending a full environmental audit. Victoria gasped. You cannot do that. That is 20 locations. You will bankrupt us in a week. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, her voice running over Victoria's protest like a tank, I am issuing an immediate freeze on all corporate assets and the personal assets of the executive officers to ensure funds are available for the inevitable cleanup costs. You cannot move money. You cannot sell property. This is a witch hunt, Victoria screamed, standing up. And finally, Eleanor said, dropping the hammer, due to the testimony regarding the willful falsification of safety data, the witness intimidation, and the conspiracy to defraud, I am referring this entire file, including the video footage and Mr. Lane's testimony, to the State Attorney General's Office for Criminal Prosecution. Criminal? Sterling sputtered. Now wait a minute. This hearing is adjourned, Eleanor declared, banging her gavel against the table. The sound was final. Victoria stood there, shaking. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking haggard and old. The reality was crashing down on her. The empire she had built on lies and intimidation was gone. The money was frozen. The handcuffs were coming. She turned slowly to look at us. She looked at Richard, who was still weeping. She looked at Eli, who stood tall beside me, and she looked at me. For a moment, I thought she might cry. I thought she might apologize. But Victoria Lane did not know how to lose. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You ungrateful little brats. You think you have won? You have nothing. Without me, you are nothing. You just burned down your own inheritance." She waited for the sting to hit. She waited for us to flinch. But the room was silent. No one clapped. No one agreed. Her power had evaporated, leaving only a bitter, angry woman in a ruined dress. I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of lightness. "We did not want your inheritance, Victoria," I said calmly. "We just wanted the truth." 2 state troopers moved in, flanking Victoria. "Mrs. Lane, we need you to come with us for processing," one of them said. As they led her away, kicking and screaming about her rights, the air in the room seemed to clear. The heavy, suffocating pressure that had weighed on my chest for years finally lifted. I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. Eli was standing there. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. The fear that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. He leaned in close, tilting his head just like he had at the gas station in the rain. But this time, he did not look around for permission. He did not whisper to hide. His voice steady and audible to everyone nearby. "This time, I will testify to the end. No matter who Dad chooses, I stand with you." I looked at him, my little brother who had become a man in the fire of this day. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tight. "We stand together," I said. The doors to the conference room opened. Beyond them, I could see the flash of cameras and the swarm of reporters waiting for the story of the year. The world was waiting to hear how the Golden Shield winner had fallen. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked out into the light, ready to tell them everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please let me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done in Nila's situation. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and turn on the notification bell to help this story reach more people.